It's not a story of courage, but a revelation of the disguise. So you see what
Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. We have good news and bad news. The bad news is that India's caseload remains abominably high. For 6 straight days now, India has reported more than 300,000 new cases every day. The good news is that help is pouring in from all sides. Medicines, ventilators, oxygen concentrators, medical supplies of all descriptions are being flown into India as we speak. The world is repaying India for its vaccines and life-saving medicines, barring perhaps China, which is also offering help, but at the same time blocking supplies and holding virtual meetings on how to fight the pandemic. China says it can help India with its vaccines. Meanwhile, countries across the world are dealing with new mutations and waves. The only way to break the cycle, we know, is to vaccinate more people. The only way to vaccinate more people is to produce more vaccines. The only way to produce more vaccines is to unlock vaccine patents. But the rich will not let you do that. The global elite does not want to share vaccines recipes. The likes of Bill Gates are championing the cause of Big Pharma. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you why this is a strategy that will come back to bite them. Also on the show, Tokyo is grappling with the difficult question, will the Olympics be cancelled again? We'll bring you a special report. In Myanmar, chaos reigns supreme. Rebels have raised a military base. Fighting has erupted on the border with Thailand. Which is the best place to be during a pandemic? Where should you go? Global rankings put Singapore on top. We'll tell you why. And more proof of how America has polluted the world. A DDT pesticide dump of 25,000 barrels has been found in the Pacific. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Brazil's health regulator has denied a request from several states to import Russia's Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine, saying it did not have the data needed to verify the jab's safety and efficacy.
The final vote this evening will mark the end of the parliamentary ratification process of the British withdrawal from the European Union.
European lawmakers are set to formally ratify the post-Brexit deal between the EU and the UK amid ongoing tensions between London and Brussels over Northern Ireland trade rules. A prominent ethnic insurgent group captured and burned down a military base in eastern Myanmar near the Thai border. Fighting broke out in Karen State, which demarcates part of the border, with residents on the Thai side reported hearing gunfire and explosions coming from inside Myanmar. Senior Burkina Faso security sources have said that 2 Spanish citizens and an Irish national who had gone missing after an armed ambush on an anti-poaching patrol in eastern part of the country on Monday have died. A member of the Burkinabe armed forces is still missing. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called on US President Joe Biden to immediately reverse his declaration that the 1915 massacre of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire constituted genocide, a move he said was upsetting and diminished bilateral ties. Heavily armed Somali opposition fighters hold positions in parts of Mogadishu a day after clashes with government troops erupted over the president's bid to extend his mandate in the country's worst political violence in years. As per a top climate official, China to press ahead with its multi-billion-dollar financing of coal plants in developing countries, despite Beijing's stated aim of slashing carbon emissions. The local meteorological authority issued a yellow alert as massive sandstorms recently swept across many areas of North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. The sand wall stretched for hundreds of meters and enveloped the buildings in many cities, coloring the sky an apocalyptic yellow, deteriorating the air quality. Players in the ongoing Indian Premier League have been told that they are totally safe in the tournament bubble, even as India continues to witness record COVID infections. In a letter to the 8 teams, interim BCCI CEO Himang Amin said that COVID protocols were being strengthened and assured foreign players that the board will find a way to get them back home at the end of the tournament. The move comes after 3 players pulled out of the IPL due to concerns around the travel restrictions for travelers from India. German giants Bayern Munich have announced that RB Leipzig's Julian Nagelsmann will take over as their new manager at the end of the season. The 33-year-old is one of the most highly rated young managers across European football and has signed a 5-year contract. Nagelsmann will replace current boss Hansi Flick, who announced his desire to leave Bayern Munich earlier this month. Nagelsmann led Leipzig to the Champions League semi-finals last year, and this season his side are slated to finish second behind Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga.
India's second wave is driving the global surge. Out of every 3 positive cases detected in the world, 1 is from India. 1 out of 3. That's how bad the situation is. Let me show you the latest numbers. More than 320,000 cases in 24 hours, slightly less compared with yesterday, but hardly enough to bring relief. India has recorded more than 300,000 cases for 6 days straight. 6 straight days now. The cases from India account for 38% of all global cases, an increase of 9% from a month ago. India's active cases, meaning people who are positive right now, are 2.8 million. Total cases since last year, more than 17 million. More than 82% of these people have recovered, but close to 3,000 people in India died in the last 24 hours. And this takes India's death toll closer to the 200,000 mark. The travel bans have increased. More than 20 countries are blocking travellers from India. Bahrain, China and Australia have announced new restrictions. Bahrain will now demand a negative Wuhan virus test for entry. Meanwhile, China is making it harder for even its own citizens to return home. The Chinese embassy has decided to no longer issue any health codes. What is a health code? Basically, a document that certifies the traveller has tested negative. What about Australia? Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has announced a temporary ban on direct passenger flights from India. Going by the numbers, it seems like India's situation will get worse before it gets better. On the brighter side, more help is at hand. The world has stepped in with assistance. The first shipments have arrived. Early this morning, India received its first lot of medical aid from the United Kingdom. The package included 100 ventilators and 95 oxygen concentrators. An oxygen concentrator is basically a device that concentrates oxygen from the air around you. It is used to treat mild to moderate patients. It doesn't need refilling. It uses oxygen from the air, as I said, and it is portable. One concentrator costs anywhere between 40,000 to 200,000 Indian rupees, up to 2 lakh rupees. So India is getting oxygen concentrators from outside. Then we have something called an oxygen container, which is basically a storage tank that holds oxygen in the form of high-pressure gas or as a liquid. Singapore has been sending oxygen containers to India. The second tranche was picked up by an Indian Air Force plane today. Similar containers were airlifted from Bangkok and Thailand. In recent days, India has procured 14 such containers from 3 countries. 4 have come from Singapore, 6 from the UAE and 4 from Thailand. These are empty containers. They'll be used to transport oxygen around the country. Countries like France are pitching in with specialized medical equipment. In a statement today, the French embassy announced a solidarity mission to India. France has committed to sending 8 medical oxygen generators. What's an oxygen generator? It's a much bigger form of an oxygen concentrator. It can serve many more people. France will also send the first installment of liquid oxygen. 5 containers will be dispatched to India. They can supply oxygen to up to 10,000 patients per day. France will also be sending 28 ventilators and 200 electric syringe pumps. Germany too is pitching in to tackle the shortage of oxygen. It has offered to share a medical oxygen production plant with India for 3 months. Plus 23 mobile oxygen generation plants are being imported. Germany will also send 120 ventilators and N95 masks. Then we have Australia. India's Quad ally, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, told the press about the package coming from Australia.
What Australia will do is we'll provide an initial package, and I stress this is an initial package. There will be more to follow of support and to deliver this as soon as possible. So 500 non-invasive ventilators, 1 million surgical masks, 500,000 P2 and N95 masks, 100,000 surgical gowns, 100,000 goggles, 100,000 pairs of gloves and 20,000 face shields. We will also agree to commence procurement of 100 oxygen concentrators along with tanks and consumables. DFAT will manage the movement of this equipment over the course of the next week.
So Australia might have halted passenger flights from India, but it is not placing any curbs on the movement of assistance. That's something that China is doing, blocking medical cargo. On Monday, we told you how China's state-run carrier Sichuan Airlines is blocking supplies. It had decided to ban cargo flights to India. Now, the Global Times claims the airline is making a U-turn. It is now, quote-unquote, re-evaluating the original plan. China's state broadcaster CGTN says the flights will resume. The question is when, because India needs supplies right now. Beijing will not address these questions. Instead, it is hosting a virtual conference on the fight against the pandemic. It has invited foreign ministers of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So every South Asian country is represented except for India. A reporter asked the foreign ministry today why India was left out, and Beijing said India is welcome too.
This meeting is the extension of joint efforts by China and relevant South Asian countries to combat the pandemic and revive social and economic development, and is an important component of international and regional cooperation in the fight against the pandemic. China has always been committed to the principles of openness, inclusiveness and win-win cooperation. This includes opening our door for the participation of South Asian countries, including India. We will also make positive efforts to help the relevant regional countries in their fight against the pandemic and protect public health of the region.
The meeting happened this afternoon. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with his South Asian counterparts. He said China is ready to provide support to India and willing to share Chinese vaccines in South Asia. So far, New Delhi has appeared less than keen on reaching out to Beijing. What about the United States? Well, after refusing to sell vaccine raw materials, it is now trying to undo the damage. US President Joe Biden spoke to Prime Minister Narendra Modi last night. He promised to send emergency assistance. This includes oxygen supplies, vaccine materials and medicines. On Monday, an Air India flight picked up oxygen concentrators from New York. And this is a welcome shift. Remember, America was reluctant to help. It changed after it was slammed the world over, not only for refusing to help India, but also for hoarding vaccines. So here's another shift. America now wants to send up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine to different parts of the world. When will that happen? after American regulators check the safety of the shots. It could take weeks, it could take months. There are no clear timelines. The world is not America's priority. So why is it sharing vaccines at all? Because it's got too many of them. More than 550 million excess doses. I'm going to repeat that so that you can note it. The United States has 550 million extra vaccines. That's what you call hoarding. Let me show you a chart. It shows how many doses some countries have produced and how many they have exported. These figures are till the end of March. Countries like China and India exported more than 40% of their supplies. Even the European Union shared 42% of its supplies. What about the United States? It exported 0 shots. What about the United Kingdom? Again, 0. They exported nothing. Countries like the US and the UK represent the global elite, the rich who booked millions of doses well in advance. Now they have extra vaccines, enough to inoculate their population 3 times over, in some cases 5 times. But they haven't shared anything with the world. And they're making sure this system does not change. They will not share vaccines. They will not share vaccine recipes. Life-saving drugs have been locked in patents. It's a subject that I bring up every day because it is the most important battle right now. The world needs to end this pandemic, and for that we need vaccines. And the rich have locked up these vaccines. Reports say during yesterday's phone call, Prime Minister Modi pressed President Biden about this. India has been pushing for a waiver on vaccine patents at the World Trade Organization, the WTO. The US and the UK have aggressively blocked this proposal. And backing them are countries like Japan, also the European Union. After the phone call, a senior official of the Biden administration was asked if America will relent. Will the United States back a patent waiver? Team Biden said it has nothing to share on this front. And it's not just governments, by the way, who are putting patents over lives. Even individuals who make up the global elite are championing the cause of Big Pharma. The likes of Bill Gates, the billionaire philanthropist, believes vaccine formula should not be shared with the developing world. He gave the statement on Sunday. Bill Gates was asked if it would be helpful for intellectual property protections to be lifted. How did he respond? With an emphatic no. Why? Because he fears that lifting patent rights, even temporarily, could compromise the safety of vaccines. Bill Gates believes in keeping the circle tight. He says the ideas like moving production from a Johnson & Johnson factory to a facility in India are novel. And they only happen, and I'm quoting here, they only happen because of our grants and expertise. Bill Gates is towing the line of Big Pharma. According to a report, every vaccine maker has its own secret recipes and supply chains, and they insist that no other approach is possible. Nothing else will work. And this is exactly why the world is lagging behind in the global vaccination drive. It's because the supplies have been limited by design. It's not like we cannot produce more. Only a few companies are being allowed to make vaccines right now. Consider these numbers. More than 1 billion shots have been administered so far. 1 billion. 87% of these have gone to rich countries. 1 in 4 people in wealthy countries have got a jab. What about the poor countries? Just 1 in 500 have got a shot in these nations. Do you see the gap? 1 in 4 versus 1 in 500. According to a report, only 0.2% of the doses made so far have been dispensed to low-income countries. And this is not just a question of inequity, which is bad enough. This strategy will come back to bite the rich because at this rate, the pandemic will take years to end. And if it doesn't end in the poor countries, it will not end in the rich ones either. We have enough proof of how this virus mutates and jumps borders. So this is what we have as of April 2021. Around 18.5 million doses being administered daily around the world. At this pace, it would take at least 19 more months, 19 more months, to inoculate 75% of the world population, which means extending this pandemic for at least 2 more years. What we're saying is very, very simple. Vaccine patents are a dangerous idea right now. the biggest roadblock on our path to recovery. If the world wants to end this pandemic, it must end vaccine patents first. Let's talk about Japan, where a countdown is underway for the biggest and perhaps the greatest sporting event in the world, the Olympics. Now, it's extremely rare for the Olympics to be postponed or cancelled. Since 1896, the Games have been cancelled only 6 times, mostly due to wars, last year because of the pandemic. Are we headed towards a 7th cancellation this year? And I ask this because Japan is witnessing a spike in infections. With just 87 days left, 4 major prefectures are under a state of emergency. Cities that were supposed to host foreign teams are slowly pulling out, and the Japanese government seems divided on the road ahead. And all of this has once again raised the possibility of the Tokyo Olympics getting cancelled or postponed. Here's a report.
Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and Hyogo, the 4 most important prefectures of Japan, are under a state of emergency, the 3rd since the pandemic began. There has been a surge in infections, the largest in 3 months. The timing couldn't have been worse. The spike is happening amid a countdown. A countdown to Tokyo Olympics 2021. Just 87 days are left for the biggest sporting event in the world. The Olympic torch is traveling across Japan. In 2020, the country had to douse its flame. Will it be the same this year? The possibility can't be ruled out. The authorities seem divided. Last week, the Secretary General of the Liberal Democratic Party revealed that cancellation remains an option. Toshihiro Nikkei said, "If it seems impossible to do it anymore, then we have to stop decisively." These comments were at odds with the united front put by the Japanese government, and they've led to consequences. More than 500 towns and cities had signed up to host Olympic teams. But with the government divided and cases soaring, most of them are rethinking their plans. The western town of Okoizumo was going to host India's hockey team. Now it won't. The Kurihara city in north was planning to host South Africa's hockey team. Now it won't. Australia's swimming team will not train in Nagaoka City, and Canada's table tennis team will no longer go to Okaya City. The host towns are pulling out. What about the people? What do they want? In a poll conducted by Kyodo News, 39.2% of respondents said they want the games scrapped. 32.8% favored another delay. Only 24.5% wanted to go as scheduled. The poll also touched on the nationwide Olympic torch relay. 49.3% said it should be canceled in areas with high rate of infections. 35.9% said it should be canceled entirely, and only 13.2% said it should continue. The message by and large is that people are worried, but can Japan really afford to cancel the Games? Since winning the rights to host the Games in 2013. Japan has spent billions of dollars in getting the infrastructure ready. Last year's postponement has already led to $6 billion in economic loss. If the Games are canceled again, the losses would be tough to bear. Besides, Japan has branded the Games as humanity's win over the pandemic. A cancellation after such statements will not send the right message. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It's going to be a tough call for Japan, a second cancellation or risking a super spreader. But that's what this pandemic is all about, tough calls. Some leaders thrived under the pressure. Others panicked and failed. The most crucial toss-up was between lockdowns and jobs. There is science to back both. Lockdowns act as circuit breakers. They flatten the curve and give governments breathing space. Last year, most countries used lockdowns to build their health systems. It has come in handy now during the second wave. On the flip side, lockdowns kill jobs, and that's a fact. We are talking about daily wages and gig workers. They do not have job security. The moment businesses shut down, they're unemployed. So that's the choice for most leaders, life versus livelihood. And it's not as simple as it sounds. Many people will tell you that livelihood comes second, but chances are these people have secure jobs. Striking this delicate balance is tough. It's important to make this decision with compassion, something that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apparently failed to do. The story is from October 2020. Britain was dealing with a new wave of infection, so Johnson chaired a meeting to discuss a second lockdown. He grudgingly agreed to it. But this was what he supposedly said after the meeting. And I'm quoting, "No more lockdowns, let the bodies pile high in their thousands." The Prime Minister apparently used some colourful language in his remarks, and we will not go into that. But the words that stuck out were these: let the bodies pile high in their thousands. Boris Johnson would have rather presided over a bloodbath than impose a third lockdown. And for the record, he did end up ordering a third lockdown. That's what saved Britain from complete collapse. Leaders have resigned over far less in Britain, but Boris Johnson is not going down without a fight. He has denied making these remarks. The Prime Minister says he would rather focus on making the lockdowns work. For a man of many words, Johnson had very little to say about these reports.
No, but again, I think the important thing I think people want us to get on and do as a government is to make sure that the lockdowns work, and they have. And I really pay tribute to the people of this country, this whole country of ours that have really pulled together and working with the vaccination program. We've got the disease under control. I mean,
Johnson has also deployed his ministers to defend him. Senior Minister Michael Gove says he was in the room for all pandemic meetings and he never heard language of this sort from the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister made a decision in that meeting to trigger a second lockdown. He made a subsequent decision to trigger a third lockdown. This is a Prime Minister who was in hospital himself in intensive care. The idea that he would say any such thing, I find incredible. I was in that room. I never heard language of that kind.
Only a public inquiry can get to the bottom of this, but one thing is certain. This wouldn't be Boris Johnson's first outrageous remark. When the Wuhan virus first came to Britain, he could not care less. Johnson made it a point to shake hands with everyone. And then last month, he dropped another gem. He said greed and capitalism helped Britain vaccinate effectively. Greed and capitalism. He later called it a joke. So these new remarks are not beyond him. But it's his word against the British media's. Letting bodies pile up is not a strategy. It's a death sentence. And unlike what many people think, this is not a toss-up between mass deaths and mass unemployment. There can be a middle ground. In fact, the United Kingdom is a great example of this. They're running a massive furlough scheme through the pandemic. Millions of gig workers are out of work, but they're still getting paid. So despite 3 lockdowns, there is no mass joblessness. Just 6 days back, Britain reported a dip in its unemployment rate. So you can have the best of both the worlds. But in some countries, things have not panned out so well. Look at Brazil. President Jair Bolsonaro thinks lockdowns are deadlier than the virus, and his countrymen are paying for it. Same in the United States. Donald Trump resisted lockdowns throughout 2020. The result was this: more than 500,000 Americans are dead. The bottom line is lockdowns do work. But the trade-off depends on how you manage it. Our lockdowns have also evolved since last year. We now have local lockdowns, mini lockdowns, night curfews. So the bitter pill is not as bitter anymore. And this does not make the choice any easier for leaders anywhere in the world, but that's their job. No government has been perfect during this pandemic. Their let-ups have cost lives and livelihoods. But it's important to be honest and compassionate about it. They say politics is the last resort of the devil. Comments like these, "let the bodies pile," is exactly why. And when things look so dark, here's a question that we often ask ourselves: where do we go? Which is the best place to be right now? I mean, during a pandemic that has claimed 3 million lives and is showing no signs of retreating, where do you go? Which is the most secure place to be at? A simple answer would be your home, and that's perhaps your best bet. But if we take into account how well countries are faring right now, how successfully they've contained the virus, then the answer would perhaps be Singapore. It has topped the rankings for pandemic resilience. It is providing its citizens a pre-pandemic quality of life. No wonder it's called the land of the rising sun. Which other countries follow Singapore as the best places to be? And what can we learn from them? Our next report explores.
Near zero community cases, an advanced vaccine rollout, free movement of people, and a relatively normal life. This may sound too good to be true for most of us. Not for Singaporeans. For them, this is just another day. Which is why Singapore is the best place to be during this pandemic. This small island nation of 5.7 million people has topped Bloomberg's COVID-19 resilience rankings. Here's why. 20% of Singapore's population has been vaccinated. Community transmission has become non-existent. 11 out of 12 new cases reported last week were imported. Total of 61,000 cases have been recorded till date, and only 30 people have died due to the virus. All workplaces have reopened. All movie theaters are functional. Even fitting rooms in stores remain open. How did Singapore achieve this? By not showing complacency. In March 2020, the island nation swiftly sealed its borders, suspended international travel, and imposed a strict 2-month lockdown. As the transmissions decreased, Singapore's small and compliant population embraced vaccines without any hesitancy. Life is back to normal now, but people haven't let their guard down. Following Singapore is New Zealand, with just 2,609 cases and 26 deaths in a population of 5 million. It's the second best place to be during the pandemic. Today, nearly 2% of New Zealand's population has been vaccinated, and all restrictions have been loosened. The Jacinda Ardern government opened up the economy faster than any other country, and even won a re-election in October 2020 as proof of its pandemic success. On the third spot of COVID-19 resilience ranking is Australia. Just 29,700 cases and 910 deaths in a population of 26 million. Nearly 15 million COVID-19 tests have been conducted, and 3.7% of the country's population has been vaccinated. Besides these three countries, featuring in the top 10 list are Israel on the 4th spot, Taiwan on the 5th spot, South Korea on 6th, Japan on 7th, UAE on 8th, Finland at number 9, and Hong Kong on the 10th spot. India, which is currently grappling with a second wave, has been ranked 30th out of the 53 countries assessed. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In economics, they often talk about priorities. It's called a guns versus butter debate. These are metaphors for weapons and food. Every country must make this difficult choice. Do they need weapons or do they need more food? The last year taught us that we need hospitals. The public health infrastructure was simply inadequate all over the world. In fact, it still is. The world needs to invest a lot more in the health sector, but its priorities appear to be elsewhere. The world's military spending is rising unchecked. Last year, it almost touched $2 trillion. Let me put that figure in context. The global military budget grew 2.26%. In the year of the pandemic, 2.26%, while the global GDP shrank 4.4%. So even in the middle of a recession, defense budgets expanded. If we look closely at these numbers, there are some interesting trends. And these trends tell you why nations are arming in the middle of a pandemic. Trend number one, the big five spenders have marked out their territory, the US, India. They make up 62% of total spending. Presents the new geopolitical reality. These five countries are the five pillars of an emerging multipolar world. Trend number two, China is arming, and it's arming fast. Beijing spent $252 billion on defense last year, $252 billion. Their military budget has grown. You see, piracy on the high seas can be an expensive affair. Despite the spending spree, China is yet $78 billion on defense. That's around 39% of global military spending, more than America. So modernization was their focus in 2020. Trend number four, NATO is. This was Donald Trump's pet, constantly complained about Europe not meeting this threshold. Conflicts have continued despite the pandemic. In fact, on Sunday, Chinese state media reported three new warships have been. One of them is an amphibious assault ship that could be deployed near Taiwan. PLA vessels are already sailing in disputed water. So the message from China wants an escalation. It wants to test the resolve of the democratic alliance. How have they responded? With deployments of their own. Britain's HMS Queen Elizabeth is all set to lead a strike group to the South China Sea. The voyage route is guaranteed to rile up the Chinese. The ship will visit India and Singapore. It will then sail through the South China Sea before visiting Japan and South Korea. And this voyage is all about messaging. It is being called the biggest fleet to leave Britain in a generation. Along the way, allies are also expected to join. There are joint drills scheduled with Japan, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, France, Italy, Turkey and India. This is Britain's arrival in the Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Boris Johnson talked about playing a greater role in East Asia. Well, this is his big-ticket mission. Britain's entry at this point is crucial. The Philippines and the US have just concluded a military drill. It is important to keep that momentum going. Plus, military is an insurance for Taiwan. On Monday, Australia's defense said the world must not discount the threat of a conflict between Taiwan and China. The threat is real and imminent. World politics looks like right now. China spoiling for a war and a defined democratic alliance fighting for a rules-based order. In this context, it makes complete sense. Countries spent more because they felt threatened. India faced Chinese aggression against Chinese cyber attacks. Japan and South Korea do not want the PLA patrols on their horizon. Pandemic or not, conflicts continue to fester, and in conflicts, guns are way more useful than butter. Let's shift focus to Myanmar now. The anti-coup protests, in fact, died down in the last few weeks. Myanmar was slowly slipping out of the news cycle, but ethnic rebel groups are determined to carry on fighting. They have destroyed an army base along the eastern border with Thailand. It was a much-needed morale booster for the opposition. But the army is preparing for a decisive response. Troops are being moved. Myanmar appears to be on the verge of a full-blown.
The Myanmar junta has met a formidable opponent. They lurk in the shadows, using the cover of night to strike decisively. The Karen guerrillas, battle-hardened fighters from the country's southeast. On Monday, they mounted a daring attack on a military base along the Thai border. Karen fighters seized a base at night and torched it to the ground. The fire was still burning by Tuesday morning. In these videos, shot from across the border, you can faintly hear a gun battle raging. The attack was a morale booster for the anti-coup camp, but the joy was short-lived. Within hours, the junta struck back. They carried out airstrikes on villages controlled by the Karen army. Battalions are moving into forward positions, possibly for a larger offensive. Nearly 25,000 villagers have fled their homes. The stage is set for a full-blown civil war. The Army-Karen rivalry isn't new. It is often called the oldest running civil war in the world. The coup in February has reignited this conflict. Young protesters are enrolling at Karen training camps. Here they are given rudimentary battle training for the war ahead. Away from the border, protests continue, but they have lost momentum in the last couple of weeks. There was a brief demonstration in Yangon on Tuesday. Dozens marched through the streets, their hands held up in the three-finger salute. Bystanders responded with applause and salutes of their own. Moments later, they dispersed. This is the new form of protesting in Myanmar, flash mob style, because sustained rallies are an easy target for the army. Open protests have become rare, but the Karen offensive in the east has injected some momentum. Protesters fear the world may soon forget the coup in Myanmar. There were signs of this over the weekend. Myanmar's coup leader visited Jakarta for the Asian summit. Leaders agreed on a post-coup consensus in Myanmar, but there was no mention of political prisoners. Protesters saw this as a sign of Asian collusion. This is the biggest worry for Myanmar's citizens, that the world will move on, that this will be another forgotten coup. And looking back at history, it is difficult to fault them. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Pay up before you preach. We've been saying this ever since America began pushing other nations to update their climate goals, its own historical role in polluting the environment notwithstanding. We've been carrying reports detailing America's culpability, and tonight we come to you with more proof. A DDT pesticide dump of 25,000 barrels has been discovered in the Pacific. These barrels are spread all over the coast of Los Angeles. The discovery is alarming. It offers insights into why high levels of DDT have been detected in the area's marine animals. At least 24,000 of them have been rescued over the years, with some even suffering from cancer.
Resting deep in the Pacific Ocean, this is just one of 25,000 barrels discovered by scientists at the University of California. What do the barrels contain? Dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, or DDT, once hailed as a wonder pesticide globally, now banned in most countries. But how did these barrels get here? All thanks to industries in Southern California, which have used the basin as a dumping ground for years, all the way back to the Second World War.
Looking at the historical records, how this had potentially occurred for decades on a monthly basis, it shouldn't have been a surprise to us, but it was still just not anything I had really wrapped my head around in terms of envisioning what we might actually find.
The territory these barrels are spread across is staggering. They lie all over this 22-mile stretch of water between Los Angeles and the Catalina Island.
I think we surveyed 36,000 acres or 148 square kilometers, and this was 3,000 feet. We had greater than 25,000 targets based on some of the data analytic tools that Dr. Merrifield talked about, that we have a high degree of confidence that these are indeed barrels.
Scientists say their survey will clean this mess up. But will it lead to accountability? Because high levels of DDT have been detected in the area's marine animals for years. Since 1975, 24,000 animals have had to be rescued from its harmful effects. The impact has been the most severe on sea lions, with 25% of the adult sea lions found to be suffering from cancer. DDT contamination has been the leading cause of this tragedy, and it continues to enter the aquatic food chain to this day. One clear lesson from this discovery is that when humans callously pollute the environment, the consequences last for generations to come. The second lesson is this: those who have polluted the world more than anyone else historically should first pay up before they preach climate action. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The first supermoon of 2021 is dazzling the world tonight. If you look out of your window, you'll probably notice that the moon appears to be bigger than usual. It's a spectacular show, but this year there are no spectators. Most of the world is under stay-at-home orders. Iconic landmarks were deserted as the supermoon emerged in their backdrop. Take a look.
A tinge of pink bathed the world today. Over the empty streets of Germany, over the still waters of the Bosphorus, and over the rising tide at Bondi Beach. The supermoon dazzled in the skies, but the people below were in crisis mode. Usually, such celestial events are much celebrated. There are viewing parties, packed roofs, and stargazers glued to their telescopes. But this year was different. With half the world under some kind of lockdown, the moon's spectacular show was for an empty gallery. This was the first supermoon of 2021. Scientists are expecting at least one more this year. It is a rare phenomenon, but a simple one to grasp. The moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical, so the distance between the moon and Earth keeps changing. A supermoon must satisfy two conditions. One, it must be a full moon. And two, it must be closest to Earth on its elliptical orbit. When this happens, the moon appears bigger and brighter than usual. Hence the name supermoon. Another name you've probably heard is pink moon. But the color has nothing to do with the name. It comes from a pink flower, phlox, which blooms around this time. If you saw a tinge of pink tonight, it wasn't the moon, but the pollution around you filtering the moonlight. If you missed this supermoon, don't worry, because the next one is on May 26th. Scientists are calling it the closest supermoon of the year. Granted, this isn't the best time for stargazing. But amid all this gloom, a lunar spectacle should come as a relief. A sign that we're all in this together. Because when the moon takes over the sky, it's light for all.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.
Ah!